Welcome everyone to the first webcast preparing the annual meeting of the ICE, the Intergovernmental Committee of Experts, that should be organized earlier February next year. So we are here and we thank everyone, the audience and the panelists, to have granted us the time this Friday afternoon. We know it's not easy, but it's to discuss on an engaging topic on how can we build stronger institutions to help us reach equitable growth. So I'll give the floor to my co-host, George Dirango from CNBC, to continue.
All right, so thank you very much. Now, to discuss this issue, we are joined by our three panelists here and one in Nairobi through video conference. We have to my immediate right, Mr. Antonio Pedro, Director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Sub-Regional Office for Eastern Africa. We have Ms. Florence Gatome, Partner and Director at PricewaterhouseCoopers, extensive research on numerous sectors in a number of economies in the country. Thank you very much for joining us. And then we have Professor Anastase Shaka, the CEO of the Rwanda Governance Board, a critical point in ensuring stronger institutions in the country. And we have joining us in Nairobi, Dr. Julius Muya, the Executive Secretary of the National Economic and Social Council of Kenya, an advisory body to the government of Kenya. We have the audience here who will be participating in the panel discussion as well. We'll have a chance for all of you to ask questions, hard-hitting questions, because you're at the heart of this conversation. And then we have Novella Nikwigize and George Ndirango, myself, now to take you through the next 45 minutes, at least under an hour, we should be done with this discussion. Very precise. So we'll go straight into it because of time. As Novella had mentioned, we are here to exchange on how to strengthen our institutions. And of course, we'll start with you, Pedro. As part of the global theme, what is the relevance of such a topic for the 20th session of the Intergovernmental Committee of Experts?
Well, first of all, I would like to welcome the fellow panelists to our house, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And I would like also to use this opportunity to situate the event. This is what we call our Intergovernmental Committee of Experts. This is our statutory meeting. That's where we meet with our member states to discuss issues of interest to them, developmental issues. And I'm sure you would ask me, so is this another talk show? Well, I would like to provide the evidence that it's more than that. For example, in 2011, we were in Djibouti and we discussed tourism. As a follow-up to that, then we did work that contributed to the formulation of the IGAD Sustained Tourism Master Plan. And then we've helped Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Kenya in strengthening their tourism policies. In 2013, we were in Kampala, in Uganda, discussing energy. We are now supporting the East African community with the formulation of the energy security policy framework. And last year, we were in Madagascar discussing the blue economy, essentially arguing for a holistic approach to the development of marine resources. And we are currently helping SADC, COMESA, and the ECA to formulate the blue economy component of their industrial policy. So we use these events to raise awareness about emerging issues and then develop relevant products with a view to helping their accounts mainstream those ideas into policy frameworks. So this is where this event is situated. And as you also are aware, ECA focus on work is priority area of focus now is structural transformation. And you cannot pursue structural transformation without strong institutions. So this event will be interrogating the institutions within the context of structural transformation and of course the centralization. And there is no better country to host this than Kenya, and that's where we are going in February 2016, because as you know, devolution is a priority issue now in Kenya. So that's the context, and later I will provide further insights on about the event and how it situates within the context of our overall work.
You're talking about structural transformation. For the audience and for the people that may have access to this content, can you just tell us briefly what it entails? What's structural transformation?
Well, for us, structural transformation is about changing the structure of our economies, which are essentially, as we all know, agriculture-based, and helping them to make the transition towards higher productivity, sectors with higher productivity, manufacturing, larger shares of manufacture and industrialization, supporting the service sector, improving the productivity in all of those sectors. So that's essentially what most countries are aspiring for, and is reflected in their blueprints. For example, if you look at the economic development and poverty reduction strategy for Rwanda, EDPRS2, it is all about structural transformation, changing the structure of its economy, which is agriculture-based, rural-based, one that is more competitive, where the manufacturing industrial sector has a greater share of the total economy. So that's essentially what we are discussing, what we are focused on now in our work at ECA.
All right, now, Professor Shaka, you're the body that formulates some of these policies in regards to equitable growth and strong institutions that we're talking about today. But now, give us a very realistic or honest response. To what extent can we say that Rwanda owes the progress it has achieved over the last decades to stronger institutions?
Thank you very much. First, I believe development and institutional development particularly is a policy matter and is a political issue. So all depends on choices you make. So in 2000, we formulated Vision 2020 with about 6 pillars, and the very first pillar was about good governance and a capable state. If you want strong institutions, if you want a strong state, you have to have strong institutions. So the choice we have made is that our national development, our national reconstruction after the genocide will have to be seated on institutions that are efficient, that are delivering services, and that are delivering development to communities. How did we do it? Or if you want some indicators that are showing that progress has been registered. As you know, 20 years ago, Rwanda was destroyed. Then our strategy was, the very first 10 years, if you look at it roughly, we focused on building institutions that are going to deliver 2 things. 1, basic services. 2, about fundamental issues, social cohesion, reconciliation, stability, and security. That's when we had the commission, different commissions established. But then, starting with 2004-05, that's when we started to put in place institutions that are responsible for rapid growth and for rapid poverty reduction. So that when you look at our economic development and our delivery of our development, we find that in the last 8-10 years, that when we registered highest growth, highest poverty reduction. But why? Where does it come from? The bigger engine is our homegrown innovations or solutions. Those homegrown solutions and innovation are known to create not only higher participation of the people, create more inclusiveness, create more ownership, but also distribute wealth to some extent. So in the last, between 2006 and 2011, we saw, thanks to those second phase of our decentralization, we saw over 11% of our society uplifted out of poverty. In the last 2-3 years, we have seen another almost 6% uplift out of poverty. So we've tripled from 2001, I think, up to 2014. We saw our GDP per capita more than tripled. So which means it is coming from somewhere. So though we increased our population over 3 million in those 15 years, but we have seen growth in terms of income has gone far than growth in terms of population. So our homegrown solutions have been very key. Our decentralization policy has been very key, but more importantly, our reforms in our institutional policy. So in 2005-06, as I said, among the very many reforms we introduced was creating institutions that are going to deliver higher results, create more impact. That was the period we started putting in place the boards. We started with the Rwanda Development Board, then we went to Rwanda Governance Board. Those are kind of cross-cutting boards, but later on we also put in place sectoral boards, agricultural board, education board, social security, health. And the spirit was to put together a number of public institutions with very similar mission, to put them together, create one institution that is powerful, that has more resources, that has more capacity, so that we can have more results on the ground. And it's working, it's working. We haven't yet dealt with all the challenges we have, but we see the policy of putting in place the boards, including the institution I work with, the Rwanda Governance Board. We see them delivering results. And finally, I want to put an emphasis that actually the foundation, if you have governance and if you fix governance well, then development will follow. But if you get it wrong, it will be very difficult to get development fixed.
Yes. As we are speaking about governance and good governance, we have Ms. Gatome that is working for an institution that offers, among other services, advisory to the public sector. So how would you, what is your take on that? How would you define what kind of institutions are necessary to get to equitable growth?
Okay, thank you. In the last 10 years, we've worked with several governments in the region on decentralization, and this has been a very key area, especially in attaining equitable distribution of resources and ensuring the citizen participation in development. And what we found from the last 10 years is that it's very important to have strong institutions in place. And strong institutions means strong systems, strong processes, and also adequate funding to fund the strategies of the institutions. A major issue we've seen is having the right capacity on the ground within the decentralization aspect, and ensuring that decentralized institutions have adequate capacity in terms of staff skills and also the number of staff in each position, number of resources. But some of the challenges we are seeing the decentralized strategy across the region facing has mainly been in setting up appropriate systems and structures and ensuring they're accountable. And that's a problem that's common across the region. Having the right staff in place, attracting qualified staff at local government level has also been a challenge. But having said that, there's been a lot of good outcomes from decentralization. We are seeing infrastructure, for instance in Uganda, there's been a lot of development in infrastructure in terms of schools and hospitals using these decentralized structures, and also in Rwanda, as Professor Shaka has said. So that has been a plus. We've also seen more citizen participation in development within the country, and also in the way they elect their leaders, and the sort of being involved in the whole planning process, and also holding their leaders accountable. So with the better development of systems and with proper regulations in place to support the systems, we've seen it has helped in most of the countries in bringing development to the people, closer to the people.
All right, thank you very much for that. You've touched on accountability, and we'll rope in Dr. Muya from Kenya joining us through conference. I don't know whether you can still hear us, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, perfect. Now, since it is 2010, Kenya launched the national program of devolution. Now, we'll give it a slight comparison. Rwanda has made a lot of traction in that area, in the sense that we have a lot of decentralization happening in the country now, as far as performance contracts going all the way down to the sector level. So, in your opinion, 5 years later, what has been the role of decentralized institutions in accelerating this structural transformation we are trying to get our hands and our minds wrapped around?
Well, basically what we are experiencing now with devolution from 2010 is that within the counties where we have devolved a lot of the political power and also a bit of physical space, there is a lot that is going on there in terms of coming up with new rules, new regulations that reflect the wishes of the citizens at that level. But having said that, we have the national government still responsible for policy and coordination, and that is still at the formative stages because you know, government is fairly complex, and with us now having devolution from 2013, then we are still learning on the few areas that we need to make sure that they are functioning well. But let me say that the experience so far has been that there are good lessons to learn in terms of how the national government can coordinate and make sure that what is going on in a decentralized system is answering to the bigger goal. And in our case, we have the Vision 2030 that we've been implementing from 2008, which has been defining what we do as a country, what we do as a government, and also at the same time, it is what is defining what the county governments are also doing. So having an overarching goal through Vision 2030 to us has proved to be very useful in making sure that we've got one framework that all of us are pulling towards.
If you had maybe, as you are saying, you are still going forward, but if you had one element, one tool that is helping you keeping those decentralized institutions performing, accountable, transparent, and still independent, what would it be?
Well, there is the structure about the Commission on Revenue Allocation, which determines how much revenue each of the county governments gets. And also there is an institution called the Control of Budgets, which monitors how counties are spending their money. And through that process, we are able to monitor how they are doing their work and also tie in disbursement of money with their performance. So somehow having a control on the past does really help at the national level.
Right now, let's rope in Mr. Gitomi, because I mean, you've also touched on this topic as well. From your own understanding, what are some of these challenges that are encountered when you're trying to talk about a decentralized system and the impact on government and service delivery?
There are three main challenges from my end. One is having proper laws that create an enabling environment and that are very clear to the decentralized units on what are their roles and functions in that decentralized role. And we find if those functions are not properly defined, it can bring a lot of duplication and confusion on what aspects the central government should handle and what the decentralized units should handle. Second and major issue has been having adequate staff in terms of numbers and skills aligned to the strategy of the decentralized units. And it's a challenge, I mean, not just in this region, it's across Africa. It's been a bit of a challenge getting the right staff to implement the strategy on the ground. Then the third one has been around creating the right systems that avoid bureaucracy and that are efficient to enable the decentralized unit run in an effective manner and achieve its objectives, whatever, and also aligning its strategy towards its structures.
Right. I think we'll also bring you in before we get Pedro and throw it to the audience. Now, things seem to be going very well at this moment. Would you say we have covered everything that we need to look at in terms of ensuring that we have a flawless system now on the long term?
Perfection is not on this land. So I think there are our decentralization system, our governance system, as we say, is people-centered. And indeed, if you say your governance system is people-centered, then decentralization is the better way to go. That's number one. So in 2000, we've adopted a decentralization policy, but we have chosen to go gradual. So from a policy perspective, we assume that we need 3 phases of 5 years each for us to accomplish the fully fledged decentralization system. So next year, we will be looking at 15 years down the road, what have we achieved. So we have been gradual both in terms of fiscal decentralization, in terms of service decentralization, in terms of capacity. So if you look at 10 years back and you look at the capacity we're talking, our district and their staff they had was just like a few. But today, a district have more staff than 2 ministries combined. So that's in terms of capacity. When you look financially, today, the budget of the low-income district is higher than that of 3 ministries combined. So in terms of fiscal decentralization, whereas 10 years ago, maybe the national budget we were giving out maybe 6 to 7% of the national budget to districts, all districts combined. Today, 1/3 of our national budget goes straight to districts. So meaning 35% of our total budget is going there. So it means, but when you look at services, actually you can say even decentralization of services has gone further than our fiscal decentralization, because most of the services, when we do our studies, we find that over 90% of services that people need, they get them below district, at cell and at sector level. So which means only 10% they will go to district. If you go 25 years back, even if you needed an ID, you could come to the ministry to get it. So a lot has been achieved, but a lot is yet to be accomplished. So we still have, according to our targets in decentralization and development, we still have a long way to go in capacity. We still have a long way to go. Yes, we have decentralized services, but when it comes to the quality of the services we want our people have, we see that we still have a long way to go. Accessibility, yes, but quality, we still want to do more. Another point I wanted to chip in, and my immediate neighbor talked about, I think actually it's you talked about performance contract. One of the framework that has pushed us to probably move forward in terms of registering a lot of results is our performance contract, Imihigo. So, and of recent, it is an innovation, it is a homegrown, but which keeps evolving and improving. So of recent, a few years back, our government has decided that out of 100% in the Imihigo of districts, 10% will be given by the citizens to enforce vertical accountability. So as of today, through what we call citizen report card, that is being conducted by Rwanda Governance Board, 10% of each district in Imihigo is coming from the assessment from the people. So those mayors or districts that are performing better, they have better scores from the people. Those ones with poor accountability and service delivery, the people are hitting them, and it works. It's a way of inculcating that culture of delivering better services, but also of looking at the citizens as our masters, because we are serving them. So it's a practice that we are thinking to take forward and to make sure that we get results out of it.
Yes, I think at this time yes.
If you don't mind, let me just go back a little bit on why this event and where how it's situated within the context of the story of structural transformation. I think all of us have been celebrating for years the fact that Africa is growing at impressive rates and so on and so forth. But the major criticism on the growth story has been the quality of growth, and how in the process we are leaving quite a lot of people behind. So in our economic report 2014, which is Dynamic Industrial Policy in Africa, Innovative Institutions, Effective Processes, and Flexible Mechanisms, we've argued for a couple of things that my fellow panelists have discussed here. For example, we did say that we need high levels of policy coordination. We also said that we need strong institutions, the point that Professor Shaka was mentioned earlier, and that we need to have coalitions, and that the dialogue between the public and private sector have to be strengthened, so that we go beyond the top-down approach in which some of our development processes have been sort of based on. So it is about ensuring that we have quality growth, that we do not leave anybody behind. And therefore, the topic of decentralization becomes important, because we don't have pockets inside the same country that are more affluent than others. So then the issue then becomes, what kind of institutions will deliver for all? What kinds of challenges are countries confronting with a view to ensure that, for example, the issue of distribution of revenue between the central and the subnational jurisdictions is addressed. I mean, this is a very important issue, for example, in Nigeria. We all know about the problem between the Niger Delta and the rest of the country because of the distribution of oil revenue, the so-called the 13% derivation principle. So it's important to have formula that ensure that we don't have those pockets of affluence living with pockets of poverty. It's about promoting broad-based development. It's about generating inclusive growth. And that's why we are linking institutions, decentralization, and structural transformation.
Thank you. I think we should give the floor to our audience here. We are lucky to have people that work in the area and that are confronted to those questions on a daily basis. So if you may have a question or a comment to make on the topic, the floor is yours, briefly. Yes.
My question actually is for Dr. Julius Muya. Actually, I just wanted to ask him about the economic implications in Kenya about the decentralization process. A lot of the economic gravity in Kenya tends towards Nairobi or the Northern Corridor. And I was wondering how decentralization can tackle with quite large spatial inequalities that are existent in the country. What kind of mechanisms will there be to make sure that there's a redistribution of wealth and economic activity across the country in a fair manner?
Dr. Muya?
Yeah, actually, that's a very fair question. I want to say that the devolution experience is actually helping us so that we decentralize and distribute the economic potential and operations of the country from actually the northern corridor, which passes from Mombasa through Nairobi towards Uganda. Over 70% of the GDP for Kenya is generated along that corridor, and almost 50% around Nairobi. But with devolution, we have 47 potential growth poles where we are distributing the economic growth and development of the country. And of course, attendant to that is the infrastructure that is connecting Nairobi with all those 47 county headquarters. And therefore, our experience is that with decentralization through devolution, we are able to achieve better equality and also reaching out areas which were deemed previously as marginalized. But having said that, the first part of your question is that devolution is not cheap. In our situation, we found that there is a lot of money that has to be provided for, because we have a bigger government now with a national government and 47 subnational governments which were not there. But we are hoping that we'll reap the fruits of spending so much money, much more than we were spending before.
Thank you.
Let me stand up so you can see me. My first question is to the professor. I think you made a very important observation, and I may say even conclusion, that institutional capacity in the context of Rwanda has led to growth and economic development, particularly since 2004. And you're making a case where pre-2004, improving institutional quality in Rwanda was more related to stability and security issues, but post-2004, it has led to robust contribution to poverty reduction and development. To those of us who pay attention to how to get new growth and development, your suggestion is that institutional capacity or quality has something to do with it. So can you expand for us, for our understanding, why do you think improving institutional quality is inherently linked with poverty reduction and economic development? And my second question is open to all the panelists. It's on decentralization. So far, we have been discussing about the benefits of decentralization. However, there's a counter-argument that decentralization can also lead to complexities because now we have many decision makers at the local level. Their coordination can be challenged, particularly around issues of strategic importance at the country level. Moving forward quickly can become a challenge. So to what extent do you think decentralization and decision complexity is an experience in Kenya or in Rwanda? And related to that, is decentralization for everyone or does size matter? And why would small countries in our sub-region be interested about the decentralization story? Thank you.
Can you a little bit repeat the question, specific question you gave to me, because the microphone is not so clear.
My first question simply is, I thought you said institutional quality or institutional capacity development in Rwanda post-2004 led to or contributed to rapid development and poverty reduction. Why is that the case?
Thank you very much. So I said it was a matter of choice. The choice we've made immediately after the genocide was the priority of the priorities 94, 95 was stabilization, was creating conducive environment for people to live together, social cohesion. That's why the type of institutions we put in place and to be strengthened at that time, given also the resources at our disposal, went into focused more on security issues, social cohesion issues, and basic services, rebuilding institutions, ministries were down. So we were not thinking about RDB in 95, 96. But now, 10 years down the road, you could see social cohesion was tangible, you could see the security of the country was back, we could now invest in thinking in long-term development, sustainable development. So that when we started engineering and innovating, two things came at that time. One was revisiting our institutions and see how they should be set. And one of the main drive of the conclusion at that time was, can we merge our institutions and different services from the ministries to form the boards, which boards will be the drivers of greater impact for sustainable development. That's when RDB started as number one. We combined like 5 or 6 institutions. Then after that, we have the RAB, Rwanda Agricultural Board, that combined a number of institutions, but RAB is supposed to be delivering greater results than the predecessor, the institution that existed before RAB, were doing in a better way because of economy of scale. You no longer have a number of chief budget managers in 5 institutions, you have 1. So there is an economy of scale, but also there is a greater impacts, there is avoidance of duplication. So then we went on with institutions that, like Rwanda Governance Board, we had 2 pre-existing institutions, but we had services scattered in different ministries, local government, Prime Minister's Office with media, Ministry of Justice. Those ones, they were brought together because they are similar to the sector of governance, but also we created new ones. For instance, there was no institution to look after, to be the custodian of the homegrown solutions, to keep monitoring them and tell the government if they are working or not. So that institution has become now Rwanda Governance Board. So it's a matter of improving your governance, looking at it. And the third point that I think has been very critical in our developmental process was, as statisticians, they have a say that if you want to improve it, you have to measure it. So what we started to do as Rwanda Governance Board when we were created in 2011 actually, we said, I think we wanted to make sure that whatever we advise the government is evidence-based, and whatever we criticize, we can measure it and show if it is red, if it is yellow, and say exactly what should be improved. So that's how we put in place the governance scorecard for Rwanda, to look at about 8 indicators to be able to say this indicator is feeling and one of those indicators actually is economic and corporate governance, which is an indicator we very closely follow. Yes, we are using secondary data from different institutions that are much more specialized than us in economic business, but we look at a number of indicators and we watch them, and where we find some gaps, we come back to the government with recommendations. So the main, all those combined, the main drivers of our transformation are really the homegrown solutions. There is no a single sector in this country, whether you talk about economy, whether you talk about social, education, health, there is no a single sector where we haven't innovated with those innovative community-based approaches, which not only they decentralize opportunities, but also they very rapidly create ownership and participation. So instead of having 200 people caring about Rwanda in whatever area, you will have in just 2 months, you have 5 or 6 million of all Rwandans ready to be part of that agenda. And it is working. Can we say it's over? No. We are still moving. We are still rethinking, looking at them, and where need be, we bring up where things are working better and where are not working so much better, so that we move forward with an improved agenda.
All right, thank you, Professor Shaka. He had the 2-part question. Maybe we could just split it to that. Maybe Ms. Gatomi, you could touch on the coordination of lawmakers. He talked about that being among the downside. And then Pedro could touch on the complexity and whether the size of an economy plays a role in this. Okay.
All right. Despite the challenges, I think devolution and decentralization has been a successful model for achieving, equitable distribution of resources and economic growth. I think that is evident from Rwanda, as Professor Shaka said, and also from Kenya. I'll just comment on the legal aspects. The complexity, and to touch more on the next question, complexity is normally caused by the sort of legal structure you have in place. If you have very complex and multiple laws over devolution that devolved entities have to adhere to, it becomes very confusing for even the people on the ground to determine which laws to follow and even to keep updated. So the starting point is to have a clear legal structure that is well aligned to the strategies and even the functions of the decentralized units. And once you have that, it's very clear what the mandate and the function is at the decentralized level. And closely related to that is also setting up proper structures, and structures that do not cause bureaucracies or even duplications. So if there are proper structures that are now implementing those laws, then you find the complexity is reduced.
Yes, let me pick on one of your comments, Johannes. First, to say that there is no one size that fits all. So there is no model which you can pick from the shelf and then say, well, this will be applicable for this size because they have a similar size as the model's been based from, and so on and so forth. I mean, you have to take into consideration the local context, the political economy, and all the other variables, and then adjust the model accordingly. So whether devolution or decentralization only works for large countries or not, I would beg to say that I think it works for every country irrespective of its size. But as Professor Shaka said earlier, I mean, this process do not come cheap. So one has to be very mindful of that, and then have very clear visions. I mean, the point about having a very clear roadmap about it, understanding where the dysfunctionality comes from. sometimes, as you've indicated, it arises because of the complexity of your legal and regulatory instruments. So one effort might be driven towards, how do you call it, minimizing those this lack of alignment between different policies. So, for example, in our report, which I've mentioned, because we are building up on existing knowledge base. So this event in Nairobi is building on our previous research, including the Economic Report 2014. We say planning coherently for development is one of the pathways to success. So what do we mean with that? That means that, again, is something that we defend very strongly at ECA, is that we need a developmental state, or Justin Lin calls the facilitating state, or Melis Zenawi talks of democratic developmental state. So a strong state that provides some degree of control in the process. But there are other models of the devolution where the power is equally devolved. So, I mean, one has to be mindful of that. And in other circumstances, we're talking about the concentration, meaning that we don't want everything to be based in Nairobi, for example. We want, as Dr. Julius mentioned earlier, other growth goals. Then the question that you have to ask yourself, so how will those growth goals be defined? Which criteria are you going to take into consideration in defining where are you going to locate your, for example, special economic zone to ensure that there is balanced growth across the entire nation space? So those are issues that require very, very clear vision, that require a dialogue, that require the necessary platforms for multi-stakeholder participation, so that those factors become clear to everybody and the reasons behind it equally. So I think it's important, again, to have those visions, but it's equally important to have the necessary resources to translate the visions into actions. So very clear milestones. I mean, your reference to the scorecards are important, so that then when you meet, you can discuss where we are in this roadmap. So those are some of the ideas that we would like to bring to Nairobi, so to discuss which institutions will serve Africa better. Are we going to look at examples elsewhere as a source of inspiration? Perhaps that's a way forward. But again, they need to be contextualized. We need to bring everybody on board and discuss the way forward.
As a way to conclude, most of you have talked about having a strong institutional framework to ensure that the decentralization process and the structural transformation is going to be successful. Now, which institutions are you talking about? We have talked about sectoral institutions with Professor Shaka. We have talked about the revenue allocation institutions. Maybe to you that may be having a more regional overview, what type of institutions are really key to a successful decentralization process?
All right, thank you. I'll respond, and then Dr. Professor Shaka can add a few more comments. It's very important. The institutions are created within the decentralized units, so it is not a separate institution. There are certain institutions that have been set up to roll out the mandate of decentralization, and for instance, Professor Shaka mentioned the ones in Rwanda. But then at the decentralized level, then that is where we now have institutional strengthening, and that's where now we create the institutions that are going to roll out the mandate of decentralization. And these are now what you're talking about, having a proper strategy at that level, having a proper structure to implement the mandate, having adequate resources in terms of staff skills and also numbers. and then having proper legal frameworks that will help the decentralized units roll out their mandate. So those institutions are created within the decentralized units.
Yeah. Well, let me step in here, and perhaps Dr. Julia can come in later. Is that the notion of institutions that we are bringing here is much broader than organizational structures. So we are talking about the processes, in other words, in other, they call it disciplines, they call it the social capital, all of those issues that make the societies to gel, the societies to function. So it goes beyond the narrow notion of organization. So, because, for example, if you want to have a vision that is shared by everybody, you are talking about processes of empowering, of creating the platforms for dialogue. So it is important to have that broader notion of institutions.
Dr. Muia?
Oh, yes, thank you. Commenting about which institutions then would help to have equitable distribution of wealth and also sustainable growth in the devolved and decentralized units. With reference to Kenya, what I would say is that what is very important, first of all, is to understand what functions have been decentralized. So there is a clear distinction between what has been held back in the central government and what is of an implementation nature, because devolved and decentralized units are a little bit more attuned to implementation because they are in touch with the people or the citizens on the ground, and therefore decentralizing things which are of implementation nature, that would make a lot of sense. Again, it is also important to to draw the line very clearly between what is best done at the central government level, because there are things like judiciary, which will still remain at the central government level. There is things like defense, which will remain at the central government level, or foreign affairs. But then there are other functions which can be done best at the decentralized unit level. And while then we are talking about implementation, because we know one of the problems in our part of the world in Africa is having policies and plans that are not implemented. I think the structure of monitoring and making sure that implementation does take place is very important at the decentralized unit level. And for that matter, if there are some projects which are of private sector nature, having what you would call special purpose vehicles, corporations of some sort, so that the
We lost him at a very crucial
decentralized
point.
units are not waiting for money from the central government, then that can move things forward from my view.
So if I can add just one point, building on what Pedro has said, I think reference to us, when you talk about decentralization, we are not necessarily talking about districts. We are talking about the people and the service they're going to have and the satisfaction they will have out of it. So the center of the process is the people, and how the state and state apparatus is ably serving those people. So for us, if we decentralize whether resources or powers up to district and we stop there, we are not satisfied. That's why even the sub-entities that goes at the village, there are services and there are also resources gradually that are being allocated. They go to district, but when the resources reach districts, there is a way that district will distribute to sub-district entities, which we call sectors. So that means really the center of the thing in the centralization process is people and their well-being.
Right, so thank you very much, panelists, for that. I think we'll have to leave it there. This is the reason why this is the first webcast, because it's a series of webcasts. We can't cover it all in one topic. I mean, we'd be here till morning or until February. But thank you very much, Antonio Pedro, Director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Sub-Regional Office, for creating time to be here. Ms. Gatome, Partner and Director, PricewaterhouseCoopers, for creating time as well. Professor Anastase Shaka, the Chief Executive Officer of the Rwanda Governance Board. support, for creating time out of a very busy schedule, and of course Dr. Julius Muya for staring into your computer as we grill you with questions, as the Executive Secretary of the National Economic and Social Council, roping in on what exactly Kenya is doing in regards to the same, and of course right opposite me and Novella Nikwigize, who we had to learn the pronunciation of that name. We'll also talk about that in the next webcast. So thank you very much, and of course to the audience and the people who asked the questions, Andrew, Mould and Johannes, on ensuring that all of us at least get a grip of what exactly we're talking about, building up to the ICE forum in February. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.